Welcome everybody. Thank you very much for joining me today. I hope that you'll enjoy the chat. It's fairly informal. I try not to do things on a very formal basis. I hope everyone has their cup of tea ready or cup of coffee. Because caffeine keeps me awake, I'm going to join you with a glass of water. So thank you very much for joining me. As I said, very nice to have everyone on board. Ladies and gentlemen, attendees, what I'd like to spend today with you, a short little time with you, is just discussing assets and how to leverage these assets through the times that we find ourselves in. We're in very unprecedented times. Everyone knows this. They've said it before. But we are indeed in unprecedented times. We don't know what's going to happen going forward. There's been a tremendous amount of fallout. There's huge negativity that is pushed through in the press, and it just paints a really bleak picture. Many businesses through this process are going to go through a little bit of pain. They're going to suffer somewhat. They're going to lose money. And I believe that this is the opportunity where companies need to look inwardly, look at their assets that they do own and how they can leverage those assets to improve their balance sheet position, to be able to approach financiers for funding, to improve cash flows in the businesses or to expand their businesses. In respect of assets, we generally talk about movable and immovable assets. I'm going to focus on both of those today. I think for context purposes, we'll first talk about immovable assets. And when I talk about immovable assets, I'm going to focus primarily on the commercial market or the commercial property sector, which will incorporate your office premises, industrial premises, and retail premises. So when we look at the commercial property sector, many businesses out there are either renting their space or they're owning space. This will be primarily focusing on those businesses that own space and how they can leverage those assets if they are not leveraged already. But the question has to be asked, would I be able to leverage my asset in a tough economic time, or is my asset going to go southwards in terms of value? So let's spend a little bit of time on that. I've been through a number of cycles in the property sector because I've been in the valuation game for a long, long time already. So I've seen a number of property cycles. They talk about 15-year cycles. We should be facing an upswing in our cycle now, and we're currently in all sorts of trouble in our economy. But is that flowing through into the property sector or into your immovable assets, particularly your commercial immovable assets? What we're seeing at the moment, well, let's just talk about commercial property and the mechanics about commercial property. What determines value? The value is determined by income, expenses, and a return rate. Income is driven by covenants that are in place, be they 3, 5, or 10-year covenants. When I talk about covenants, I'm talking about lease agreements. And property expenses are your standard property-related expenses, of which your utilities make up the bulk portion. I'm talking about assessment rates, water, electricity. Now, often people will say, well, that's fine because you just hand over the utilities or transfer the utilities over to the tenants in terms of operating costs. Yes, theoretically that is true and has in practice been the case all this time, but we're now in different periods of time and there's going to be downward pressure on income streams. So value determinants, as I said, are income streams, expenses, and capitalization rates. Capitalization rates, for those who don't know, are the investment rate that converts income streams into value. Capitalization rates are derived from the market, and in terms of the market, you look at yields on sales. Now, when I talk about yields on sales, yields and capitalization rates are very similar, but they're distinctly different. The one is derived from the other. There is a correlation between the two. Yields are determined from the first year's net income against the purchase price of a property. So, for instance, if you've got R1 million purchase price and you've got a net income, which is your rental income after expenses, of 100,000 rand. 100,000 rand into 1 million is 10%. So your yield is your initial yield on that investment is 10%. So we look at yields on properties, and we look at how, and we interpret that to the properties that we are valuing for the formulation of a capitalization rate. That's on a very simplistic valuation approach. You get into much more significant valuation approaches where you're valuing 5, 10-year income streams. I'm not going to get into that just yet. What I'd like to demonstrate is that there isn't any empirical evidence at this point in time that could confidently tell me that the property sector is crashing. Many economists are out there. Erwin Roeder has mentioned it, Azar Jameen, John Lewis has mentioned that the property sector needs to go through a correction. Statements have been made that the property sector is overvalued to the tune of 20%. I don't believe that. We spend a significant amount of time within the listed funds. So I talk from the base of spending considerable valuation time within the listed funds. We work with some of the largest funds, or the largest fund in the country. So when we look at, will property prices crash? Will property prices decline? Which means, will the asset base depreciate? I don't believe it will be the case. When we consider the determinants of value, and let's talk about a shopping center. In fact, I'd like to talk about shopping centers and about offices briefly. If you consider a shopping center has multiple tenants. There's an income stream. It grows year on year on year in terms of lease escalations. You have property expenses, you have net incomes, and you have the yields and the capitalization rates, and it determines value. Income streams could potentially be under pressure. And the reason they would be under pressure is because there are rental holidays that have been afforded to the tenants. There are situations or instances where these rental holidays have been for 3 months or 4 months or 5 months. The PIG, the Property Investment Group, which is made up of REITs, the REITs made up of SAPOA and made up of the South African Council for Shopping Centres, have spent a considerable amount of time with retailers to work out the right deals for the tenants, for the retailers, so that the retailers would be able to succeed through this period, and the shopping centres would be able to continue and survive through this period. What we've experienced is that in many instances, the rental holidays they're not quite rental holidays, they're deferred rentals, and they've been deferred for 3 months. And the idea is that they will be recovered through the income stream of the property. Invariably, what we've seen happening, is that income stream, the rental holidays or the deferred rentals are recovered within the first year's income stream. So in theory, there might have been a rental holiday for a period of time, 3 months, but it's built back into the income stream and recovered within the first year's contractual income. So based on that, there's no impact on the income streams going forward. If we assume that we're going to be back to a normality, let's just assume that the valuation period is 1 July to 30 June. And the rental holidays have been given over this period of April, May, June, or July, August, September, 3 months. It will be recovered in October, November, December, January, February, all the way through to June next year. So there's zero impact on the income stream in year one. The only time that there may be an impact on the income stream is if rental reversions move flat or they move into negative territory. That could have an impact on rental income streams. We anticipate that the rental reversions will remain relatively flat. We are forecasting that into our 10-year cash flows with our clients. because the I doubt whether it will move negatively in the sense, because businesses are, there will be probably just adjustments to escalation clauses. Sorry, I'm just seeing questions coming through. And the question mentioned is, Pat, do you believe that deferred rentals will actually be recovered? The assumption back to normal, is that an assumption? It is an assumption, but it's based on incredible discussions that I've had with multiple asset managers in terms of how they're structuring their deals with their tenants. I believe income streams to businesses will be recovered or will be restored. And the reason I believe that is because we're a consumer-driven economy. So we like to spend money where we don't export as much as what we should be exporting, and we're importing a lot closer to what we're exporting. So we're effectively a consumer-driven economy. And people are bulletproof. They love to spend money. That's what we're like. I recall when, after level 5 lockdown, moved to level 4, shopping centers were chock-a-block with people, not because they were necessarily spending. They were spending, but not only because of that, but because they could and they would. I'm one of those people. The minute the coffee shop is open, I'm there like a bear to go and have something to eat or drink in the coffee shop, because that's my thing. And I think there are a lot of people that are like that. So I believe it will be restored, and I believe that the consumers will get back out there and they will spend money. The big kicker that I don't know at this point in time is many businesses have gone through the process of salary reductions. Will people be in a financial position? Will they have the spare cash to spend? Okay. However, we are in a low interest rate environment. So people are starting to leverage their personal assets, such as home loans, to cover any debt that they have. They can stretch it out over 20 years, reduce the installment, etc., etc., etc. So I do believe there's a good case that people will have the money to spend going forward. The asset managers will come under pressure to contain their expenses, because they can't just transfer those expenses over onto the tenants, because the tenants are going to have suffer a bit of pain on their income streams to their businesses. So when I consider those factors, there will be vacancies. We know about the EdCon issue. The vacancy rates will be another aspect that will impact on sustained values in properties or assets, your clients' assets. Vacancy, if we look at EdCon are big box tenants, but there are strategies to negate the effects of EdCon falling off the bus in respect of shopping centres. I don't believe we'll see that as a brand out there, the brands such as Edgar's and so on. I don't think it's going to happen anymore. I think we're going to see new space taking place, new retailers coming in. But what the asset managers are doing in respect of big box space, they're cutting it up, reletting to smaller tenants, or if you look at shopping centres, there generally are exclusivity agreements with certain big food retailers, so that you will only have a Checkers in a centre, or a Pick n Pay, or a Spar, whatever the case may be. But the retailers are now looking at recalculating or re-engineering those exclusivity clauses, taking the big boxes, re-engineering tenant localities, and turning those big box spaces into alternative retailers to give the consumer more choice. I'm one of those consumers. If I go into a shopping centre, there's a Pick n Pay, there's a Spar, I go to Spar. I prefer Spar products to Pick n Pay. I don't like Pick n Pay. And there are many consumers like I am out there. So will vacancies be a big issue? They will be an issue, particularly on your restaurant chains and the restaurants that may fall off the bus. We are seeing market activity out there where centres are not subjected to restaurants, but more to fast food outlets, and the fast food outlets are doing a roaring trade. So If I consider rental streams would remain relatively flat, then I have to say, and vacancies could be a little bit impacted. I think the ones should balance out the other. Then I look at the capitalization rates and I say, well, should rates of return, which measure risk, move out? There's a thought that risk rates should move out to at least double-digit figures. To give you context, V&A Waterfront sold a couple of years ago at a forward yield, initial yield of 7.5%. For the most part, we see in A-grade portfolios in the listed fund anything around 8.5 to 9.5% in terms of capitalization rates. And initial yields are very seldom anything below 8% in the present environment. When I talk about the present environment, I'm talking about 2019 up to where we are now. So with that as context, good quality stock very seldom is trading at anything above 10%. B-grade portfolios will be around 9.5 to 10.5, 11% yields. With that as a context, I then say, what will happen to values going forward? We've already said that property income stream should remain relatively flat. Expenses are going to create an issue, but they need to be managed carefully. This is the opportunity for asset managers to really implore municipalities regarding their rates increases, or the asset managers are going to have to absorb some of that cost themselves. They can't just pass it over to the tenants anymore. So if there's a bit of a cushion on expenses and vacancies are managed relatively well, then we have capitalization rates, which form the basis of building discount rates when you're looking at 5 or 10-year cash flows. And how are those going to impact on value? So as the process goes, we interpret what the market does in terms of property transactions. We apply it with a bit of an economic overview to the current scenario that we're working in. The current scenario that we're working in is we've never encountered it before. I haven't seen it, and I've been doing this for long enough. I've been through a couple of cycles now, as I said earlier. But there's still a very bullish approach to property investment currently. And that is through empirical evidence that I have been able to uncover. Now, when I talk about that, I'm talking about some retail transactions that took place in February this year. At an initial, there were 2 shopping centers that were sold as a batch for 725 or 727 million rand. The funds are being pushed offshore to an alternative investment. Sold at an initial yield of 8.5%. Okay. Excuse me. Admittedly, it was not in the heart of COVID-19, but it was in a period where our economy was not doing very, very well at all. I'll quickly show you a slide in terms of our economy presently. So when you look at our economy over here, and I'm just very recently from 2017 up to where we are now in 2020, where we forecasted the latest 2%, negative 2% growth, we've been in a pretty poor performing economy, okay? It hasn't been anything great. It's been quite boring. We've been dipping into negative territory quite comfortably over the last 3 years. So nothing exciting that's been going on in our economy. It's been relatively flat. And through that period, there's been extremely bullish market activity. The most recent sale happened in a time when we were facing an economic downgrade. We were moving rapidly towards junk status, political and policy uncertainty from our government, and poor GDP growth. But there was still activity at 8.5%. Okay, let's say that was before COVID-19. Fast forward a couple of weeks into May, 2 transactions in May, one industrial in nature at a 9.3% initial yield. Older stock, I'd probably say it's bordering C-grade stock, partially let, partially vacant. So if we take the income stream that is left and we apply a conservative market to the vacant space, we're left with a 9.3 theoretical yield in the middle of COVID-19. There's a current transaction that has been concluded, that is taking place, a retail centre, Tokai Junction in Cape Town, in Tokai. A very nice centre, busy, no restaurants, 2 or 3 fast food outlets, which have been doing very well through this period. 8.86 or 8.87% initial yield in May this year. There's a series of tranches of flow of funds, with the last amount flowing in October. It's been sold out of Fairvest, which is one of the listed funds. They've got a very nice portfolio. They focus largely in the Western Cape. Well, no, in fact they don't, but they are based in the Western Cape. So the point is, there's no empirical evidence at this point in time to indicate that initial yields or capitalization rates are moving towards double-digit figures just because, which then tells me there isn't sufficient evidence to prove at this stage that the property sector is overvalued and that it needs to correct in a hurry. I swim upstream compared to what the economists are saying. So perhaps at this stage, could I ask the organisers here to run a poll, given what I've given to you in terms of that bit of background regarding the immovable assets, do you believe that your knowledge base on property, that the property sector will come out unscathed out of this sector? Could I ask Emma, I think it's Emma, yeah, to throw it up there. Do you believe that the property can weather the storm unscathed? Yes, no, unsure. I'll give you 15 seconds to give us a response. Either whether you believe the property sector will weather the storm okay, or it's going to get punished, or you're not certain. You of course have my view, and I'll give another 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Can we get the results of the poll, please? If it is available. Okay, so there's a resounding 80% that says no, property will not come out of this unscathed. Interesting. And 20% saying unsure. No confidence on yes. So we ran this poll in a panel discussion that I had with 6. Thank you very much. We can close this off. I ran that panel, that very same question, where I spoke to a lot of property people, valuers and property folks. I had panelists from the financial services sector, I had panelists from the listed sector, I had property developers, and I had estate agents in our panel discussion. The answers were dissimilar in the sense that there was about 35% felt that it could weather the storm and 65% believed it couldn't. If I consider the residential property stock, and I'm going to spend 1 minute on that only, in our business, we also have an arm in our business that focuses on residential valuations. It deals with the financial services sector quite extensively. And in that space, we're seeing increased activity. We're seeing a lot of movement in around the sort of 800 to 1.5 million rand, 1.6 million rand price brackets, which is driven by 2 things. New time buyers that can now afford to get in because our interest rates are at the lowest levels we've ever come across. And I think also upgrades that are taking place. People are moving from their R1 million house up to a 1.5 million rand house, which gives them the extra garage or the extra bathroom, whatever the case may be, because they can afford it, because interest rates are so low. And thirdly, there are quite potentially some purchasers out there that are getting out of their 2.5 or 3 million rand property and buying 1.5 million rand properties so that they can just contain their expenses because they've had to take salary sacrifices or salary adjustments or whatever the case may be. So there is significant activity. We are seeing it in our business. We're seeing incredible volumes moving through. And it's all put down to a low interest rate environment. The question asks, will that remain in place? I believe it will for a period of time. The economists will tell you that the low interest rate for a lengthy, extended period is toxic for our economy. They're very intelligent. I don't understand it altogether. But the fact of the matter is it is there. People are spending the money, and I mentioned a bit earlier that we're a consumer-driven economy, and people may think to themselves, well, what happens if the interest rate moves up 0.5% or a full percentage point in 6 months' time? Bugger it, I'll take that gamble now. And that's what people are doing. So that's the property sector in a nutshell. You can leverage those assets with your clients in terms of if they haven't been hocked with financial institutions, you're able to hock those now. You can draw the cash out of them. Generally, you can structure those financing facilities over about 10 years, build it into the cash flow of the businesses, and you can restore funds into the business. Okay, that's from a property perspective. From a movable assets perspective, it gets a lot more exciting. And the reason it gets a lot more exciting, when we talk about movable assets, I'm talking about anything that ranges between plant and machinery, office assets, office furniture, IT equipment, production assets, production lines, assembly lines. We're involved in the valuation of the assembly plants, production lines for Isuzu South Africa about 18 months or 2 years ago. Tremendous value in these assets. Yellow goods within the construction industry or the mining sector. Vehicles, I'll talk about commercial vehicles, domestic vehicles as well. So these are assets that all businesses own. They have human capital assets and they have business assets. I'm going to focus on the business assets. I'm not going to focus on human capital assets. These assets can be leveraged to improve the status of a balance sheet. The improvement in the status of a balance sheet enables a business to reposition its financial position and then leverage financing either through the Industrial Development Corporation or the KZN Growth Fund or whomever, PRC, whatever the case may be. And you would be able to leverage the fact in those assets to improve cash flow into businesses. There is a comment, you've got to be careful about over leveraging and burdening yourself. Indeed, you do have to. But similarly, you could be in a position where you might be considering, or your financiers might be considering that your balance sheet is not looking good. Your balance sheet is looking ugly. And they may be wanting to consider pulling their funding facilities from you. By going through the process of revaluing your assets, you then reposition those assets on your balance sheet. Now let's just talk about valuing those assets. Assets in a business don't necessarily suffer the same market conditions that property does. Okay, that's our general experiences in the work that we do, and we've dealt with a number of assets, from valuing fiber optic lines to telephone networks, telephone exchanges, and the like. So it's a fairly high-end stuff. But we've also been involved in the valuation of transport logistics enterprises as far as their trucks are concerned, and buses. Now, these assets work quite differently in terms of a valuation approach, and they are affected by market forces very differently to what property does. Movable assets within any business, what we do in our operation is we take the asset registers, we filter them, we clean them up, we then look at initial purchase, we look at remaining useful life, we then benchmark that against the replacement cost, useful life that has been experienced, what is the remaining useful life, and we then put that into a model. And our model will include CPI indexing, demand levels, conditional assessments, as I said, remaining useful life. We will then run that through our model and produce a value which can then be plugged back into your asset register. When you look at asset registers, you have the accountants, and I have a great deal of respect for them. Please understand that. My son is studying to be a CA, so I have a tremendous amount of respect for that profession. The accountants or the CAs will write down assets in terms of depreciation in the books of the business. We don't. We then take the assets and we reposition in terms of remaining useful life. What are these things worth? They do carry a value. Are they valued on the basis of walk in, walk out, in situ value? We give you all those scenarios. You can then take that, or those valuations, plug it back into your asset register, filter that through into the balance sheet of the business, improve the position in respect of the assets, and suddenly your financial position could look dramatically differently, or realistic, or significantly differently, to the point that your financiers may not want to foreclose on you. It could be an opportunity to leverage additional financing, to inject capital back into the business, to help with recovery, or even to help with expansion. Let's ignore the fact that we might be dealing with business rescue issues. Businesses may want to go through an expansion project. They want to grow out, buy that great big machine because they've got a new element that they want to push out, which will reposition them in the market and significantly improve their turnover. This is a way to be able to leverage the existing assets, apply the value to them, leverage the assets, and then take them and leverage some financing off them to enable you to expand your business and to grow any further. So it could be considered a sure way to disaster. It has to be, which is mentioned by Stanley Yankelson, it's got to be done responsibly. It's got to be done very responsibly. The exercise that we run, and we've dealt with a number of big projects, huge big projects, well into the billions of rands worth, which has been used to leverage funding out of the financial services sector. My job, or our job in our business, is to accurately report on those things, on those assets. We've built a very good model with some very intelligent fellows that I have in the business, and ladies, which is, I wouldn't say it's a bulletproof model, but it's a very good model that factors in a number of indices that enable us to quite accurately, not bullishly, but certainly not conservatively either, position the value of the assets in a business, so that if a company's cash flow is such that it is able to fund an additional loan, then you can leverage those assets and get additional funding from your financiers. So the primary differences between the two: property is subject to many or multiple market forces. Movable assets are not really. It just depends on how well they've been maintained, how long, what remaining economic life they have in them. Okay, so that effectively wraps up more or less what I wanted to share with you today, to have a chat with you about the fact that we can leverage, we can assist you as a business to leverage those assets, whether they are movable or immovable, to assist businesses to recover. I don't like to see businesses fail. We're going through our own elements in our own business, like all other companies are. I don't like to see businesses fail because I don't like to see my own business fail. So I welcome the opportunity to interact one-on-one with you if you'd like to have those discussions, and let's see how we may be able to assist you in leveraging your assets to restore your businesses. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that, Patrick. It was very, very insightful, informative. I've just got a few questions for myself. As a lawyer, we're dealing quite a bit with liquidations, and of course in COBRA with business turnarounds and potential business rescue. Are you having to value properties with regard to foreclosures and liquidations? Is it quite a big thing at the moment?
So Gary, you know, it's a very good question. Our business does well in good times and bad times. We do a fair amount of work with the financial services sector across commercial, agricultural, and residential business, residential property. When times are good, people are leveraging their asset, they're lending money, they're expanding their money, they're expanding their properties, or they're using their properties to fund that nice Land Rover they wanted to buy, whatever the case may be. We are busy. When the economy swings, which is exactly what you're talking about now, Gary, it gets busy in our space from a maintenance perspective. So those people who've now overextended themselves suddenly fall into trouble. And the banks then come back to us and they say to us, can you perform a valuation so that we can understand what the value of our asset is in case we have to start writing down or making allowance for impairments. There is a bit of a time delay that we generally experience. Now, what has exacerbated that time delay or complicated that time delay through this period, which is what we've never experienced before. If we go back and I just want to share quickly a slide with you. If we look at this slide shows our period 1994, our GDP growth periods. This is that 97-98 crisis where Asia sneezed and we got pneumonia. Our interest rates went through the roof. Our property markets were impacted tremendously. They suffered tremendously. The result of that, with one financial institution, gave them a huge book of properties where they took back. Remember, in this period over here, people walked into the banks, they gave the banks the keys to their house, and they said, sorry, we're out of here, we can't afford this, you can have it. They were on the next jet plane and they went off to whichever other country they were going to. It was that bad, it was that significant, it was insane. During that period, we were extremely busy. As I said, the banks, one bank I know of, their mortgage book or their defunct mortgage book increased dramatically to the tune that it was costing them 5 million rand a month. 5 million rand a month to run that property in possession book. Okay, so there was a tremendous correction, or there was a huge fallout here, and there were a lot of repossessions that took place. There was a little hiccup over here, the 9/11 issues and so on. But for the most part, around the 2000, 2002 periods, it was relatively flat. It was a lot of maintenance work in our space that took place. Then we had the significant uptick, which really went phenomenally well. Property prices went through the roof, but so did salaries. So did people's living standards improve tremendously. We had that great big global economic crisis correction, okay? But that correction, I would say, didn't impact the property sector as significantly as what the Asian crisis did through the 90s. And the reason it didn't is because our property sector had become a lot more sophisticated and a lot more advanced since the late 90s through into the late 2000s. Fast forward to 2012, the property loan stocks and property unit trusts were converted into the real estate investment trusts. I won't go through the mechanics of those because it's quite complicated. But the point is that we suffered a lot of pain in 98, 99. We went through a great deal of maturity through the 2000s. We had our correction through the global crisis, financial crisis, where we went into negative territory from a GDP perspective. And then we kicked back up as a country. We were underpinned by the Soccer World Cup. And we then saw a little bit of a gradual, just floating along the surface kind of thing. In 2009 and 2010, when we were forecasting 10-year cash flows, which brings us now to the period 2020, my exit cap rates on 10-year cash flows were at around 10%. Okay. At that point in time, my entry cap rates on a 10-year cash flow were at around 9%, 8.5% to 9%. The 10-year DCFs that I'm currently running in the listed space, my entry cap rates are around 8.5%, 9%, and my exit cap rates are at around 9.5%, 10%. So what that has to tell us is that there hasn't been any huge correction. There hasn't been any huge shock in the property prices. So so if I now bring that to current times where we are, should there be a correction as far as liquidations are concerned, whether it's on residential property or on commercial properties in a very low interest rate environment? I don't know. The big kick, I don't believe so, I should rather say, but the kicker for me is, and I mentioned it earlier, people have had holidays on bond installments, credit card payments, car installments, insurance premiums for a period of 3 months.
Which they're going to have to pay eventually.
Which is, well, that'll be factored into the outstanding debt. So I know how the banks are working. They will say, we either up your installments slightly, or we just throw 3 months onto the end of your period, and maintain the same debt commitments. The big kicker is, have people reduced salaries? And if people have reduced salaries and they've been living right on the edge, like we do as South Africans, because we're a consumer-driven economy and we suffer extreme short-term memory loss when we've been through pain, and I say that with a great deal of respect, because I love South Africans, then we should see pain going forward. We should, Gary, we should see pain, but there is always this underlying thing that interest rates are low. Your next question should be, but should we remain in a low interest rate environment? And is the current pain that we're going through economically, which the world is going through, is it a singular black swan, or are we going to incur more black swans? So I believe this is potentially a singular black swan. And I think going forward in the short to medium term, we're going to see little black goslings. Okay. It goes back to my forecast on the property sector, the commercial property sector, that we're going to see fairly flat growth in values going forward, which is going to put pressure on asset managers to maintain expenses if the REITs are going to have to continue with their dividend payouts to their clients because of the rules of REITs. They have to pay dividends. We should see multiple goslings, certainly across the African continent, and South Africa, which seems to be impacted the majority of all of the countries on the African continent, where we're going to see periods of slipping in and out of recessionary environments. I think there'll be short-lived recessionary environments, but I think we will slip in and out of them with a great deal more frequency than what we have been. Will that result in a lot of stock coming onto the market from an arrears perspective and handbacks or repossessions by the financial services sector? I don't believe so. I don't believe so. I don't think so. A lot hinges on how long we'll be able to maintain a low interest rate environment. I don't think we'll maintain it for 3 years. I think we could keep it there for about a year, and then we're going to see pressure on our inflation rate. already there's a little uptick in our inflation rate because of the fuel price that is starting to return back to normalized levels. Yeah.
Hi, Patrick, if I put myself now in the shoes of a creditor, that you spoke about that you could get good value on an immovable asset. If we went out to liquidate a company, proceed to court and have a company liquidated, would you see good value in a return? What value how many cents in the rand could you think you could get, and could you get good value for immovable assets and in any asset of a debtor, liquidated debtor?
So Gary, nice question. When we talk about a forced sale environment, then I have to throw the standard economies or the standard factors that affect normal market-driven activity out of the window, because we're in a completely different environment. Our experiences through the 98-99 crisis and in some elements around 2009, 2010, 2011, the corrections that there were, no, not the corrections, the assets that were sold in a liquidation environment were generally bought at anything between 40 to 60 cents in the rand. They were able to be sold at, which is not a scary number at all. It's not a unrealistic number. It seems around about half of what their market value is. Seems to be a reasonable number for somebody to buy at. Presently, in this unknown environment that we're in, where no one knows what's going to happen, and there's just doom and gloom published in the newspapers, and I despise the newspapers for their doom and gloom, because they try and knock the silver lining out of my view every day. Could drive that sentiment where the purchasers will come in and they will probably try at 20 to 30 cents in the rand to get a real good bargain. For businesses that are looking at expansion, and they can get those kinds of assets at 30 or 40 cents or even 50 cents in the rand, providing the assets are in good condition and they haven't been dumped into a dam to be hidden, grease up and dumped into a dam to be hidden. Gary, you know what I'm talking about in the liquidations world. Providing that stuff is in good, usable condition and it has a reasonable remaining economic life or utility, useful life, they could be got at very good prices. I would suggest that they should be got at probably 20 to 30 cents in the rand, depending on the nature of the assets. If it's fairly big stuff, there's a de-install and reinstall cost, which is quite significant, which any purchaser has to factor in as well. So you've got a de-installation, reinstallation cost, which must be factored in. Yeah. Indeed.
Just last question on my side. Do you deal at all with municipal debt and the municipality valuations of properties? Because in our practice, we do see that the city of Johannesburg up here, I'm not quite sure in eThekwini, but properties are completely overvalued and overinflated, particularly in the inner city. And of course, that's the knock-on effect is your property rates charges, which are, businesses cannot afford. It's putting them in major difficulties. Of course, you have the valuation role where you can object. Are you seeing that as a problem where municipalities are trying to recover, where these valuations are just a thumbsuck, and in actual fact, and so there's a huge knock-on effect for the business owner who now has to pay these massive property rates?
Indeed, Gary, municipal valuations are the thorn in my side. As a business, we've consciously taken the decision not to play in the municipal valuation space, because there are implications that the Municipal Property Rates Act, certain conditions that they put out in terms of the approach to value, and it stipulates it quite explicitly in the Municipal Property Rates Act, that they want the valuations done on mass appraisal approaches, and there are always timeframes, and those timeframes are never very handsome, and the fees in that world are not very handsome either. So it can make or break a business. If you look at Rustenburg at the moment, they've had a shocking municipal valuation. The municipal valuer didn't do a great job at all. Property values in some instances increased by as much as 500%. They quoted one property where the assessment rates bill amounted to 322,000 Rand per month. Okay, per month, when the rental income stream wasn't even 300,000 Rand per month. You know, it's crazy.
We're seeing it in the inner city, rundown properties are being valued at 30 million, 25 million. And then when we object for our clients, of course, they come down considerably. So, but for the period where they're objecting, they're expected to make payment. And so it's killing the business while we're trying to object to the valuation.
Gary, it's imperative to object. It's imperative to object. I know a professor out there, professor in valuations, who's tested multiple valuation roles with some intelligent stuff he has. And he said to me that in many cases, they could qualify 12% of the role, but the other 88% of the role is questionable. So if I get a municipal valuation, or if anybody gets a municipal valuation on your property, you need to confirm whether that number is correct, whether it's accurate. You can't object against your rates. Okay, please understand that. You can't object against your rates payable. You have to object against the municipal valuation of your property. If the municipal valuation is correct, then, well, it is what it is. You can't object to that. You've got to object to the value of the property. So it's imperative that you object to that to drive your rates bill down. And good, well done. Gary, I'm glad you do this for your clients. It's important to do it. There's too much reliance in the municipalities on property rates as a source of income because it's a soft target to knock. And not enough reliance on their own initiatives, which is now we're touching on a lovely topic, which could, I know IQ's group chairman, Dirk Ackerman, spoke about leveraging the assets within the public sector to make them work for government at last year's SAPOA in Cape Town. So municipalities have to do that. They can't go and bleed the ratepayer any longer. And the Municipal Property Rates Act needs to carefully be reconsidered in terms of the approach to valuations. I know that eThekwini and Cape Town and Johannesburg have brought their valuers back in-house. They've created valuation teams in-house, so they're going to deal with it in-house going forward. They're not going to outsource it any longer. I believe that could be the answer to correctly value properties going forward, so we wouldn't have these issues where people are going to be able to object against their rates. We don't play in that space as a business. It's just, it can destroy you as a company.
Sure. Patrick, I see it's nearly 11 o'clock. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on. I really love your glass half full approach. And I assume your coffee cup is still half full.
Indeed.
Because you're a very positive guy and we need positivity. And it's great to hear from an expert that there's a positive environment to look forward to, because of course people are very negative at the moment. Absolute pleasure having you and sharing your insights and your expertise. We hope to have you back on to the show sometime in the future. Thank you very much, Patrick. I really appreciate it. So that was Patrick O'Connell.
Appreciate it.
Having a cup of coffee with Patrick. Absolutely fantastic to hear positive vibes, positive insights going forward, that there is some hope for the South African property owner. Don't miss tomorrow's show. We're talking cyber crime and cyber activity with Klaus Tepper, who's an expert in the space. Cybersecurity become a very vexed issue, a very important issue. Banking applications being hacked into, that's become a major issue at the moment. And in the COVID-19 environment, we're seeing a lot of corruption and fraud, even within the banks and people that are controlling this environment. So don't miss Klaus Tepper tomorrow, 10 o'clock. I hope you'll join us. And on Friday, we've got a big one. Bob Skinstack, the former Springbok captain, he's on the show. Don't miss that one. Bob now gone into business. Let's see what he has to say about leadership in business. So thanks again for joining us. Until tomorrow, goodbye.